Are we on
I
the
guess my
DC then?
I guess my question is though, what went wrong for DC United? And I'll let you
So
go first since I finished
if
up.
you have ball knowledge like me, then you would have known at the start of the season that it wasn't going to work out for DC United, like I had predicted.
I don't even remember what our predictions are. We have to
I
go
don't
back
remember
and do
where
it
I
now.
predicted them, but I know you were high on them and I was not. And there was a lot of debate about that at the start of the season. But safe to say, at least I was right on that one. I will give you Toronto, but I was right on DC.
Oh, you're so tough.
um, First thing for me, team turnover. Same thing as Toronto. Unbelievable amount of players that they brought in this season. I mean, just to name a few: Ruan, Mohana G's, Mateus Click, Pedro Santos, Tyler Miller. I mean, the list can go on and on. They brought in so many players in the offseason. It was always going to be tough to get those guys to learn to play with one another. I know a lot of those guys have MLS experience, and that's great. It's a good thing to bring to the table. That doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to play with one another, though. And I think that had to have affected them in some ways. Um, a lot of these guys that I mentioned too were had significant minutes in the season. It's not like a lot of guys were brought in and were just kind of like third options off the bench or something. Like a lot of these guys were, relatively consistent starters. A couple of guys were probably like first name off the bench. So it was a lot of team turnover, and I don't think the team necessarily had. I mean, I don't know how much time necessarily you would need to give to a team before you could say that team turnover is not really affecting them anymore. But even if you give it like a couple months, I mean, DC is literally on the cusp, just missed the playoffs. So, if team cohesion for an extra month could have made the difference between them getting in the playoffs and not getting in the playoffs. So, I think bringing in all those new players probably had some effect to them.
Man, it's like you were reading my notes. I've got a couple extra points on the player personnel front. But I had lots of new faces, not enough time to gel, and outside distraction. So I'll just go through my notes here really quick. According to Transfer Market, 32 players in the door since the start of last season.
Jeez.
That's very, very difficult for any coach or team to navigate, right? You're always trying to figure out your best 11, who to play when. That leads to player issues, happiness, form, a whole bunch of work that's a nightmare for a coaching staff to deal with. Rooney had a ton of work, and he never really could figure out the best group. This season alone, he played 31 players in 13 different formations in 34 games. That's basically a change of shape every 3 games. You can't develop an identity when you don't have a consistency in your shape, right? Because shape is just roles and responsibilities. But if you're constantly changing your shape, you're constantly changing roles and responsibilities. When you constantly change all of that, you don't have an identity. You don't say, okay, this is how we're going to set out defensively. We're going to be defensively strong. We're going to be clever in attack. Whatever it may be, you can't do that if you're constantly finding the correct shape to do it in. All that aside, there were the individual issues with players and personnel. So we'll start with Ravel Morrison, one of Rooney's first signings last year, and a sign of what was apparently to come during his tenure, taking him from his Derby County side. Rooney recognized the signing of Morrison with respect to money, international thoughts, etc., didn't really make sense in the MLS model. So he was never even registered with the team. He never featured once this season. So a guy who had a ton of upside, looked like he was very, very promising, not even used. Follow that up with Mohana Jose, Swedish outside back looking to provide competition and free up Pedro Santos, be a little bit more attacking minded, what have you. On a trip back to Sweden, he gets twice accused of assault and is arrested before he can even come back to the States. He misses half the season dealing with that before he rejoins the group. 2 weeks later, he's ruled out for the year with an ankle surgery, an ankle injury needing surgery. Follow that up with the controversy surrounding their trainer, who was seen making what is quoted as a discriminatory hand gesture in a team photo back in July. Backlash follows that, and they have to fire the trainer. More outside issues that they can't focus on football because they're dealing with other things around them. Finally, we get to the big one that we all remember is Taxi Fontes. Last season, he was accused of making racist remarks towards an Inter Miami player, but because there was no proof, he was never actually punished for it, and he continued to play for DC. Later in July of this year, it's reported that Taxi Fontas and teammate Nigel Robertha had to be separated both on the field and in the locker room after a physical altercation caused by Roberta's accusation that Taxi had once again used a discriminatory phrase towards him, a racist phrase towards him. They were both put on paid administrative leave, and eventually Taxi, one of the club's best attacking options, had his contract correctly terminated. All of this stuff has nothing to do with what's going on the field. When you're trying to focus on being a successful team, all of this stuff is terrible. This is some of the stuff as a part of a coaching staff that I'm on now. We're like, guys, do not bring any outside stuff in here because we're trying to focus on this. If we have to focus on this, we can't get ourselves into successful positions because we're worried about dealing with everything else. And DC had a ton of it this year, and it put them off from the start.
Those are great points. Honestly, I didn't even know about some of those until you had mentioned it. So
that's why I know ball, and you're just along for the ride, my friend.
You do your research. I do not. I'd never deny you do your research.
That's right, baby.
But it's a very good point to bring up. I will go into my next two are again related, so I will cover both of mine in one here. Our favorite conversation. It is the great old year of 2023. We are in MLS. Are we in MLS 4.0 or 5.0 at this point?
4.0.
4.0. Okay. We are in MLS 4.0. How are we not using all of our designated player spots? How are we not using all of our designated player spots? DC, according to Wikipedia, where did they go? Have two designated players currently on the roster. Christian Benteke and Mateus Click. Fine. I'm all good with that. You have another spot. I believe. Oh, wait. It might have been Taxi. Okay. That makes
it was.
It was Taxi.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, then my point there is a little bit nulled. So they were using all of their DP spots. So I'll still stick with my other point though. I think they needed some kind of like star playmaker. I think in MLS 4.0, you definitely need to make sure you hit on your stars. This isn't like a situation where it's like MLS 2.0 and you could try and just bring in big name old DPs and sometimes it works. And I don't think it works like that anymore. I think you need to hit on your star players. I think Benteke is a good start for them. I think he's definitely showing that he is a very solid striker in this league. They need a playmaker to help him out. Maybe somebody like, I don't know, Lucia Costa. Man, I wonder what he would look like in a DC uniform, huh? Guess we'll never know. But I think they need someone
so
like
toxic.
that.
You're so toxic.
He's off winning supporter shields, and DC's off to sit on their couch and watch them play in the playoffs. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, I think they need a playmaker because I look at the team, I look at the roster, and I just don't see somebody to help Benteke enough. And maybe that could have been Ravel Morrison. Maybe that could have been his role, but at the end of the day, you didn't get him registered, so you can't really take that into account. So I feel like there just wasn't that guy to go and just play make and be that attacking midfielder that is electric and is in the MVP conversation at the end of the year. And I think that would be game changing for this DC team because I think they have really good pieces elsewhere in the team. I think they have a solid, I guess, TAM core, I'll call it, I guess. And then you have Benteke, who could be a star striker in this league. Go get a star playmaker, and I think that would help the problems a lot. I mean, obviously, it's a lot easier said than done to just be like, go get a star playmaker that's going to just slot in and be an MLS MVP. But I feel like there wasn't really. I just feel like they never had a playmaker on the roster, despite all the people that they brought into the team.
Yeah, like I said, the roster build was interesting, and again, I think Rooney took it over a team, and I didn't do this part of my research. I apologize, but he took over a team that, if I remember correctly, was defensively really poor. right? I think we can remember old DC teams just leaking goals consistently. And I think his first goal was fix that. This year, they've only conceded 49 goals. And actually, that builds onto my next point. So they've only conceded 49 goals. That's less than a Montreal side that's pushing for a playoff spot, and less than Chicago and Charlotte, who are also pushing for playoff spots. So the defense wasn't the issue, but as you mentioned, you solidify your team in the back, you give up something going forward. And when you give up something going forward, that means you need to be really, really clean in the back. And one of the issues that they had was with their goalkeepers this year. Tyler Miller and Alex Bono split time in 2023. Miller having 25 appearances to Bono's 15. And I mentioned DC only conceded 49 goals, which is less than Atlanta, who's already in the playoffs, and then those teams that I mentioned. The manner in which they conceded those 49 goals was brutal. I mean, multiple times, I'm sure you remember that you could see a clip of a DC United goalkeeper, whether it be Miller or Bono, playing out in no man's land, trying to perform sweeper keeper actions and swinging and missing at a ball or being rounded by a striker for an easy tap in. Encouraged by the coach. I mean, they came out multiple times and said, this is how Rooney came out and said, this is how I want my goalkeepers to play. I want them to be aggressive off their line. I want them to try to clean things up. It's going to lead to mistakes. We know that, but that's how I'm asking them to play. It's tough to get momentum when you concede easy goals. As a player, I remember this. As a goalkeeper, I remember this, that we'd be in games against tough teams and I'd let a soft goal in and everybody's heads drop because they're like, oh, we did all this work. We're fighting. And now, we've just given up that soft goal. What's the point, right? You combo that with then hearing your coach saying, yeah, this is how I want us to play. We might make some mistakes, but that's okay. This is what I want to do. It can be hard to trust the coach. It can be hard to give your all. It can be just kind of demoralizing to a group as a whole. So I think that kind of stems from some of their issues, not a lot of them, but some of them where they gave up soft goals in games where they shouldn't have been giving up those goals. And now the team is, I'm going to use the term demoralized. I think that's the best way to put it because you're looking at them again. They're pushing, they're fighting with these clubs that are above them, teams that they might not necessarily be be a part of, be on the same level as, and they're trying to compete with them. And then you go for 60 minutes 0-0. Maybe you get yourself a goal against this team and you're feeling good, and then your goalkeeper comes out in a no man's land, gets rounded, and now all that work is gone. It can be tough, and that over the course of a season is tough to deal with, right? Because now your players are not giving everything they can at every given moment. I heard you combined your 2 points, so can I go on to my third?
Well, right before you do that,
Okay.
are you curious at all where the 2 DC keepers ranked in our favorite goalkeeping stat?
I'm telling you, there's nothing I would like more than to figure out where they finished
That's
in
great.
PSXG
I
plus
was
minus.
hoping you would say that. That's fantastic news. Here's what I'll tell you. I could give you both stats and you can guess which player was to which. So one player finished with a +2 in the PSXG plus minus, and one player finished with a -3.3.
Alex Bono's a +2.
He is indeed the +2.
Yeah, because he's been better. He's been better than Tyler Miller.
Tyler
But
Miller's
Tyler
had a
Miller,
rough season.
he has. And I just did another check. I mentioned that Rooney's first job was to fix the back line. DC conceded 71 goals last year in 34 games. I mean, that's brutal. That is something that's got to be your first priority, and he did well with it. You cut it nearly down by 30. 20. Excuse me. That's brilliant. But the easy goals are the ones that will let you down.
Yeah, you can't knock Rooney was able to do this season. He, even though he's gone, and maybe it looks bad because they didn't make the playoffs. He brought them up a level from where they were. Granted, they couldn't go much lower, but they improved.
Fair.
There's no question. 100%
100% that they have done much better than what I think most people were expecting. And whoever comes in as the next guy has a great foundation to work off, no doubt. Here's the problem that they had. They had a run in to the end of the season with 6 games or 5 home games in 6 matches, and they couldn't get it done. DC had the fate of their season in their hands with these 5 home games in 6 against opponents that they could handle. A Chicago team that's currently in 11th, a San Jose side that's been poor on the road, 2 wins on the road, dismal RBNY side that couldn't score goals to save their life, especially on the road. They had 15 available home points. 9 probably would have done the job to get them in. Instead, they went and lost to Philly. They drew San Jose and Atlanta in games, I think it was 0-0 and 1-1. And then they got beat down by conceding 5 to a Red Bull team that to that point had scored 25 goals all season. They gave them a sixth of their goals. They did have a 4-0 win over Chicago that made the last game that they played last night meaningful, but they couldn't get it done at home. The saying is always win at home, draw away, you make the playoffs. Do that, you're in. They couldn't get the job done at home, and now they're booking tee times waiting for their season to start in 2024. That is where I believe they need to start off next year. Is they've got their defense fixed. They've got the pieces that they need to figure it out. Now they need to be able to close or finish out games at home. If you can become a team, I think right now the team with the least amount of home wins in the playoff picture right now is 7 right now, with Red Bull assuming that they're the next team up because they're closest to DC. Every other team that isn't even that's already qualified, minimum 8, but usually double digits. Excuse me. If you can get to be a double-digit win team at home, you're sitting pretty. That has to be the next step if I'm looking for, a 5-year plan. Is you went and solidified your back line. Now you got to figure out how to do it at home. And then from there, maybe you add a big name or so. But this team is close. They need to just get the guy who's right to get the team mentally there. Because I think technically they're there. It's all about mentality now, finishing games out.
That's a great point on the home games one. I mean, that they have. I mean, currently, I know that they're obviously eliminated, but currently, anybody that's above the line, they have the least amount of home wins in the Eastern Conference by 2. So,
yeah, by a bunch.
Yeah. I mean, even if you turned one more game into a home win, I mean, they're not eliminated. They're in a good spot to get into the playoffs. So, I think that's definitely a good point. I mean, look at Montreal. I mean, they're a team that we definitely like. I think they're overplaying certainly what we expected from them, and certainly what they look like on paper. I think a huge part of that is because they have 10 home wins this season, which is outrageous. Dominant at home,
exactly.
and that's why they're an 8.
Yeah, yeah. It's a massive part of the sporting game, and especially when you're fighting for playoffs, right? You need to be a strong home team. If you're letting people, and Red Bull are a perfect example last year of what happens when you're not, right? You want to talk about overachieving on the road, right? 9 wins away versus 6 at home. That difference, they earned themselves a home game and lost in the first round. You need to be a good home team. You need to be able to walk out onto your field, do the job professionally, and get it done. The DC United didn't do that this year, especially when they had a run of five home games in 6 to end the year, and that's where they fell. So